thanks to everyone else who's joined today and the other speakers. So I'm going to run through, hopefully in a fairly quick time, a bit of a run through of what's happened to us in the UK. Some of the key people issues that we've had to deal with in Sheffield, and a little bit about what we have done, certainly within my team and our department, as a bit of a case study around how we kind of been looking after ourselves through this process. But to start us off, just in case you aren't aware, and I can't believe there's many around the world that aren't aware of the University of Sheffield, surely, but we are one of the top 100 universities in the world. We're ranked 13th in the UK. And as you can see, quite a large organisation, but the key thing for the relevance of this presentation is a big international and particularly Chinese student population. And we're one of the Russell Group group of universities of which are the kind of research intensive organisations in the UK. So in terms of us, that's the context. In terms of the UK, this is a very rough and ready timeline of what's happened in all things COVID related, both nationally and specifically to us here on the campus in Sheffield. And I think the key thing to point out here is clearly there's been quite a slow start, and certainly if you listen to any of the press in the UK, there's arguably been quite a slow response as well to that slow start. But we had very little going on for quite some time in the UK as cases started to emerge. And then around mid-March, pretty much everything went up in the air and things changed very, very quickly. One of the key triggers from a UK perspective was the Premier League being suspended, not least because there's large swathes clearly of the population are wondering what they're going to do on a Saturday afternoon if there's no football to watch. But more broadly speaking, it's a signal that these were still large gatherings of thousands and thousands of people happening mid-March as cases were starting to escalate in the UK. And we were starting to get quite a lot of pressure on campus from our staff and our unions, and to a lesser extent our student body, to say, why are we not taking more drastic measures and closing the campus? And we were very keen to be seen to following whatever the government advice was. But as soon as that happened, or very shortly after that happened, we had effectively a ban on international travel. So the FCA is the Foreign Commonwealth Office. It's the government group government department that advises on such things. And then we really started to see things hitting home on campus. We had our first case on campus identified shortly after that. Our reaction then, when you look back on it now, seems a little bit OTT, but we kind of shut a whole building down. We instigated a huge deep clean. We triggered all of our incident management processes, which are pretty well tested, but I'll cover those a little bit later on. And then almost immediately, it kind of escalated further and further, and we just got lots and lots of calls to close our campus. And it was increasingly obvious that it was going to be very difficult to get people in onto campus working when there was such concern in our population. So we took the decision to close the campus, effectively close the buildings, continue our teaching, but close the buildings, and shift our teaching online, which we did over the course of a weekend, which is a Herculean effort by our academic colleagues in particular to do that. And then very shortly after we'd done that transition, the whole of the economy in the UK started slowing down. So schools closed, and then we entered into our period of lockdown, which many of you around the world will experience in different guises. What that meant at that point, though, was from our point of view, lots and lots of our staff had lots of issues around schooling their children at home, or at least childcare. We had lots of people who were very concerned about their own health if they had underlying health conditions themselves. And we had lots of worries from our student body, obviously, about health and well-being, but also about their education. So we brought forward our Easter break. We closed the university down for earlier, and we closed it for an extra week to allow us a bit of time, a bit of breathing space to really do the proper shift online and get our teaching into where it needed to be. We're now off the end of this chart and actually coming out to the other end and starting to see some loosening of the lockdown restrictions. And again, I'll come on to that shortly, but I think that's where really the hard work is going to start in terms of getting the campus back up and running again. So in terms of the key people issues that we've been grappling with, they fall into three categories. Really, it's the top line talks about people's working arrangements. The middle one is what I've touched on already, is that huge shift from face-to-face large-scale lectures and teaching to an online version of it. And the third one covers off the issues we've had around research. So in the interest of time, I'll focus on the top and bottom ones. But as I said, we've got basically 8,000 staff all shifted and working from home, or pretty much all. And a lot of those grappling with childcare, with schooling. And we could sense that this was going to be a big pressure point for lots of people. It certainly was for me. I've got 3 kids at home, all of school age, and it makes life quite challenging for me. So I guess if that was the case here, we ought to do something a bit more reassuring for people. So we put an early message out saying to people, look, we know it's difficult. Do what you can. We understand that productivity may reduce, but please don't worry about it. We will commit to making sure that everyone who's working with us continues to be paid in full whilst we're in this period of lockdown and we're experiencing all of the challenges we have. We tried to put out an assurance message. We also then had to grapple with this government support that was put in place, which is fantastic for many employers. The government basically said it would fund up to 80% of staff salaries if they were unable to do their jobs in their normal place of work or at home. And companies could apply to get this funding, which was great, but it was very, very ambiguous for the higher education sector. There's a lot of questions about whether we could or couldn't, should or shouldn't apply for this. And then trying to identify those people who are working from home, who having had all of those messages around productivity, we then write to and say, actually, do you know what? We don't think you can do your job properly at home. We'd like to put you in this position of what's called furlough. And this is what it means for you. So again, another shift in our communications. That's certainly a key part of trying to reassure people that actually by doing this, they were helping the university, helping our financial situation. And then the third group of people we have had is those that are still doing what we deem to be essential services. So this is one of our security team, and we have a full security presence on campus whilst the buildings are closed. We've also got a range of different people who are maintaining different long-term experiments that need to be maintained. We've got people looking after some of our animals in the facilities that we have there. And we've got other key services making sure that our buildings and our estates can stay safe whilst we're not there. So we've had to manage their expectations and their workload and their fears and concerns about being on campus while everyone else is kind of in this lockdown situation. So our messaging to each of those groups has been slightly different, but each time we've tried to take a position of reassurance. The online or shift to online teaching, rather, I've covered already, so I won't labour that point. The third group, though, to perhaps pick up on is our researchers. And as I said, we're a research-intensive university. It's absolutely at the core of what we do as an organisation. And we've had to shut the vast majority of our research labs because the government advice is if you can work at home, you should work at home. So we've taken that to, I guess, the extreme at the moment. And we closed a lot of the labs. Most of the research that we've been undertaking, we've either shifted at home or it's had to pause. And that's caused, understandably, some concern within our research community. Not least because they're seeing those in the middle box. You can see they're still coming into campus because we do have a number of, particularly in our medical school, a number of researchers looking into the genome of the virus, looking into ways that we could try and support the efforts to get a vaccine going, as well as supporting our local Public Health England efforts on testing for COVID. So there's lots of people that are still on campus, and that's causing some dissatisfaction and concern for some of those who aren't able to. And then finally, we've got a group of people, and this is actually one of our engineers who's been converting their workshop and lab into a production facility. So what he's got on there is a 3D printed mask that we've been making on campus and producing lots of protective equipment for the NHS and our medical staff around the country. So we're really trying to rise to the challenge of supporting the national effort on the COVID response, as well as all the local stuff that we have within the university. In terms of how we've tried to address that, I mentioned earlier we have an incident management response approach, which we've rehearsed a lot. We do a lot of business continuity planning within the university for just this kind of circumstance. And that triggered in very quickly, very easily, and we have a series of subgroups running which look at each of these areas. So the people issue around working from home versus the furlough versus the being on campus, issues around learning and teaching and the communication to our students about their education, about their qualifications, the process with our research community, looking at student recruitment, and effectively all of that works through to provide our overall response. And we've made sure that we've kept all of our key people informed. So we have weekly Zoom type meetings for all of our senior leaders and heads of department, so a group of about 100 or so people, so that we can brief them absolutely on everything that's happening sector wide, as well as what's going on locally. We communicate regularly with all of our staff on very different messages sometimes, but keeping the same themes of reassurance, but in a spirit of openness and transparency. And we've made sure that we keep our trade unions informed. So I'm spending an awful lot of time talking to trade unions, at least weekly, often more frequently than that, just making sure that they understand what's going on. And so far, I have to say they've been pretty supportive of the work that we've been doing. So in terms of looking after ourselves, our focus very much here is on the well-being of staff. And I know there's some questions come in about the stresses for people in all of this change. So when my team moved off site, I was very concerned that we lost the sense, that we could lose the sense of that team perspective. So some very enterprising people in my department came up with this idea of this wellbeing hub, which we've now rolled out to different departments across the university. But this is it's a central place that allows us to connect either individually as groups, place to look after, or for resources to look after our well-being, as well as some stuff around productivity and our personal development. So it covers anything from your desk setup at home and you're making sure you're working safely, to signposting people to resources for drugs and alcohol abuse or domestic violence or whatever else might be affecting their lives. We've got online learning and development resources, but by far the most popular part of it has been the kind of social element of connections. So we've got a pets corner. So this is my colleague Peter's dog. We've asked people to send in pictures of what they've been doing to keep occupied during the lockdown. So images you can see there, that's actually me in my back garden swimming against a tether to try and keep myself fit. And we've done a few nights out, in inverted commas, at various pubs that we've created, the stay in, the lock in, and as we emerge from lockdown, the halfway house. And it's been really, really good to just keep that engagement and keep that social element going within the department. We're also encouraging our managers to make sure that they touch base with their teams on a regular basis, trying to just keep people informed of what's going on, but also using it as an opportunity to check in, because those visual cues that you might get that something's not quite right when you see someone in the office or in the campus day in, day out, much harder to get remotely. So it's a real focus of the work that the team's doing, and so far it seems to have been fairly successful. Obviously, the longer we go on in this situation, the more challenging it's going to be. So I'll conclude with just my thoughts on what I see as the kind of future people issues. Clearly, in the short term, we've got an issue about returning to campus. How we deliver teaching as we do that, we're likely to see the end of major large-scale lectures and much more blended learning. And the points we've just talked about in terms of the remote management of staff will come up as challenges. In the medium term, as our student recruitment goes into our next academic year, the financial implications of the university will become much more apparent. That's going to have knock-on issues for us in terms of size and shape of the university. And I know other colleagues have talked about things that they're doing to try and address the cost issues. And then longer term, I think we need to think much more differently about how we work, what flexibility we ask for from our employer and what we're able to provide, what that means for our space requirements as a campus, but also how do we respond to those changing expectations of our student body. So I'm conscious of time completely, so I will stop there. The slides will come out, but there's some links on there if anyone has any queries about the stuff that's gone up, but I shall hand back to Liz.